Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Mr. Kempton. We're going to take about 10 or 15 minutes today to expand on our knowledge related to SYNFIG. Our first tutorial activity, we looked at some basic drawing techniques with the spline tool, and today we're going to look at simple animation. So again, we're familiar with our basic screen, our drawing window, our drawing tools. We have our our layers on the right-hand side, our properties down in the bottom left, and we have our timeline along the bottom. So we're going to start by doing a little search for a background image that we're going to use today, and I think I'm going to use a simple maze image as my background. So going to the internet, I did a simple Google search for maze, simple maze, and I chose this option right here. And if you're on a Mac, you can simply drag and drop your file to save it onto your desktop, or if you're on a PC, you can right-click and save image as. So I've saved that to my desktop. It's a PNG file, so it should work just fine for us. I'm going back now to SYNFIG, and remember our layer control is over on the right-hand side. So what we're going to do is add a new layer, and to do that, we're simply going to import an image, and that image is called maze. I'm traveling to my desktop, choosing the image and choosing import. So it drops the image onto our screen, and you'll see here that we have one object, one layer now created in our file. So this icon right here is a handy icon because it allows us to adjust the position of our image. And it also allows us to stretch our image horizontally or stretch our image vertically, or to keep everything in the proper ratio, we can use this red button right here, and we're going to stretch our image until it is pretty much perfectly placed on our screen. There we go. So I'm happy with the positioning of my background image now. So we're going to put an object onto our screen and animate it and have it follow the maze until completion. So the object I'm going to use is simply going to be a circle. So I'll choose my circle tool, and over on the right, again, we have a number of different options on how to create that shape. So please make sure they're all turned off except for your actual circle layer. And I'm going to draw a green circle. So I can change the color of the circle at any time, but if I choose the color I want beforehand, that'll make my life a little bit easier. And I'm going to draw a little green circle the size that I want. So if I go back to my selection tool, I can now move this image around. So I'm going to place it right on the start arrow, and I am almost ready to start my animation. Now we're going to add one more object, or animate one more object within this activity, and that object is going to be a title. So I'm going to choose my text tool, and I'm going to click on my screen, and I'm going to type in some text. I'm going to call my animation Crazy Maze. So it pops up on my screen, and again, you'll notice if I click just on my text, down here I have my properties that allow me to change the way the text looks. And all that I'm going to do right now is adjust the color so it's not the same color as my ball. I'll make my text a nice bright red. And again, here I have this red dot. The green dot allows me to position this object wherever I want. And interestingly enough, for the text, this red dot allows me to stretch my text horizontally, or to stretch my text vertically, or to do both at the same time. So I'm going to adjust the size and position of my text to make it work for me, and I'm going to place it off the screen so I don't see it right now. So if I click off on that text, it's totally gone because we're only seeing what's within the active layer of our image. So I'm just going to move that back a little bit so I can see the boundaries. There we go. So you may think, well, I've lost my text now, but if you want to get it back at any point in time, you can simply click on your text layer, and then you see where it is, and you can control its position again. So at this point in time, I'm pretty much ready to animate. So what I'm going to do to switch from edit mode, which we're currently in, where I can draw and position and change the look of my objects, down here where you see the little green man, we're currently in edit mode. So green is edit mode. And when I click on that icon, it switches me to animation mode. And here's now where I can start to move objects around and have them animate within the software. Now, for a lot of you, you've already have some experience with animation, so some of the terms I'm going to use are going to be very familiar to you, terms such as keyframes, frame rate. But for some of you who are new to animation, these terms are going to be terms that are very common in all animation applications. So please pay attention to them. They will be used over and over again, especially if you take ComTech further on down the line, or even getting into grade 12 and taking an animation course. So let's get started. We're on frame 0 right now. This is my timeline, and this tells me where exactly within my animation I am, anywhere from the start to the end. So right now I'm on frame 0. So what I would like to do is take this object, and when I click on it, it selects its layer, and it shows me its properties. So I'm going to move ahead a set number of frames. And right now, the timeline bar is set to 24 frames per second, which we can adjust later, and I'll show you how to change that. I'm going to go ahead, say, to about 12 frames. And I'm going to change the position of my green dot. Now, you're going to see, if you scroll down a little bit here, that the actual position of my dot has now changed. So the application has created what they call waypoints in SYNFIG. But most of you, if you've done animation before, you're going to know these as keyframes. And keyframes is the common term that most applications use in video editing and in animation. So I'm simply going to refer to them as our keyframes. So I've made a keyframe by changing the position of the object. If I want to continue with my animation, which I obviously do, I'm simply going to continue moving my object to where I want it to be. But first, I need to place my timeline in the proper position. So I'm going to move ahead in my timeline and then place my object. I'm going to move ahead in my timeline and place my object. And the computer is going to keep track of all this information. And when it comes time to render or preview or play my animation, you're going to see it following the path that I am creating. Now, keep in mind too that the speed the object moves is a factor over time and distance. If I want my object now to move at roughly the same speed, I'm going to give it more time to get here because this distance is longer than this distance. So I can back this up now and take a quick look at it. And again, my preview doesn't do a great job, but it does give you an idea of what your animation is going to look like. So I can at any point in time see a more detailed preview, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But I'm going to continue with my animation here. Keep animating all the way through until I solve my maze. Now this is a slightly longer stretch of travel, so I'm going to make that longer on my timeline. Back to a fairly short stretch of travel. Now here again, I've got a long way to go, so I'm going to give it more time to get there. I'll get a little further to drop coming down the vertical stretch. And just a few more keyframes to add, and we will be finished our animation. And then into the home stretch to there. And we'll try and do something a little more exciting at the end. Let's move it right off the screen here. Okay. So I'm going to go back to frame 1 and just run through that pretty quickly here and see. And again, the frame rate is not good at all in the preview, but that's fine. So to get a better idea of how this actually looks, we're going to come up here and we're going to click on the, let's click on the render settings box. No, sorry, we'll go do that. We'll do the preview settings box. So we'll click on the preview settings, and I'm setting my quality at 1 and my frames per second at 30. So what I can do when I have those set is click on my preview, and it will give you a much more detailed look at to what your diagram or your animation is going to look like. And there we have some nice smooth action with a much better frame rate. All right, so my animation isn't quite done yet. If you do recall, I had a text object on my screen. So I'm going to go back and look at my text object. I'm going to go back to frame 1. And when the animation starts, I want my object off the screen. After 24 frames, I'm going to have it move down onto the screen. I'm going to have it sit there for just a second. I want to get it out of the way before the ball gets there, so I'm going to start to move it across, and then I will move it up. There we go. So my animation will show the title as the animation is proceeding. Now what you will find out as you go, if I, for example, had my green ball bumping into my maze way too quickly, I can go back and I can change the position of these keyframes at any point in time. So I can just click on it and move it around, either make it move sooner, move later, or if you click on any keyframe, you can go back in and you can change the position of the actual object too. And that's something we'll look at a little bit in more detail later on. So let me render this or preview this one more time. There we go. Okay, so there we have it for now. Simple look at how to animate objects around the screen using some concepts that are quite familiar to us: keyframes, timeline, position on the screen. All right, so I'm going to quickly save this. I'm going to save as, take it to my desktop and call it maze and save. And there we go. So there's activity number 2 for you. What I'd like you to do is pick a maze different than the one I have. Create an object, doesn't need to be detailed at all. Have your object move around your maze for successful completion, and then somewhere add a title and have your title move on and move off your screen. All right, good luck. That is task number 2, and early next week we will add some more. One last little tip for you. If you work your way through your animation and you need to extend the timeline, what you'll have to do is choose Canvas, Properties, and then click on your time option. And right now the timeline is set to end at 120 frames. If you need more time, you can type in whatever number you want there. So I'm going to change it up to 300 frames. We'll apply, say OK. So now you'll see on my timeline, I can move ahead up to 300 frames and extend my animation as long as I wish.